organized by Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity in partnership with the Network for Public Interest Lawyers. Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity is an association of Christian legal professionals which started in 1986 as a fellowship of Christian law students at Makerere University. It was registered as a non-government organization and has since grown to over 500 members who are working in the different facets of the justice, law and order sector and the private sector. UCLF runs established legal aid offices across the northern, southwestern, West Nile and central regions of Uganda, with a presence in Kampala, Kayunga, Kasese, Gulu, Masaka, Buyukwe, Arua, Madiokolo, and Terego district. UCLF is the only organization in Uganda that brings together law students, lawyers, advocates, and judicial officers. Our vision is for a world where justice and human dignity is a reality for all, and our mission is to share our faith in Christ, promoting access to justice and respect for human dignity through speaking up, fellowship, mentorship, and defending the rights of the vulnerable. UCLF's mission is premised on Proverbs 31:9 that says, "Speak up and judge, defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And our objectives are to inform and educate people from whatever section of society, and especially those who have no access to legal information about the law and their rights, to advocate for, represent, and advise the voiceless and the disadvantaged, to advocate for the enactment and the implementation of fair laws and policies that are in harmony with Christian principles, to encourage member participation in ethical legal practice and community involvement by providing pro bono services, to mentor and nurture students and young lawyers. Over the last 16 years, UCLF has been engaged in the provision of legal aid to the indigent in communities, solving access to justice needs of over 5 million beneficiaries. Legal aid is dispensed under 6 main programs. We have the Access to Justice program, which basically reaches to the indigent by providing civil legal aid services, criminal public defense services, and access to justice for refugees. Paralegal adversary services, UCLF has stationed paralegals, and these paralegals connect suspects to their families, sureties, lawyers, and they also guide the suspects in applying for police bond, self-representation, and they educate them on court processes. We have the Students and Young Lawyers Mentorship Program. UCLF is involved in student mentorship, student professional, and spiritual development. Through the years, UCLF has engaged in organizing and hosting youth retreats, seminars, symposium, law moots, student exchange programs, fellowships, university orientations, and now the youth conventions. And we believe that this is a key area where we can still fast-track partnership with NetPIL in terms of professional development of students in the law schools. We also have a program to do with environmental justice. We have a program to do with membership and professional development, and this is where our CLE trainings come in. We also engage in juvenile justice and child protection. We also engage in gender justice, and then we have a counseling program where we provide free counseling services to clients and our members of UCLF, and also support victims of gender-based violence. Just for the emphasis, for those who are online and those who are here, if you want to become a member of UCLF, you can become a member by being an associate or by being a lawyer, and you fall within the following categories. One, we have individual membership. Individual membership to UCLF is annual, and you're required to pay 100,000. Institutional membership is 1 million. And Professor and all the other members of NetPIL who are here, I'm happy to report that NetPIL is a paid up member of Uganda Christian Lawyers. We have fellowships, 500,000. Life membership is 3,500,000. I would encourage senior members of the legal profession to take up life membership. We also have student membership at 25,000, and we again encourage lawyers to pay for students to benefit from a range of services. We have an online and physical library in Wandegea where you can visit and do your research, but also you can do your research at your will where you are through the online services. Again, thank you very much for coming in these numbers this morning, and those who are online. We do welcome you, and I hope that you'll have the best of the training today. May God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can place it on the table. Did I hear a hand clap, or it was just a part? Good. Thank you so much. CEO UCLF, Andrew Munya, you're online. Thank you for coming through. And so is Bagoza David, recognize your presence. Chairperson, Advisory Committee, glad to have you. Thank you for coming through. Madam Diana Ahumuza of the Public Interest Law Clinic, thank you for coming through. I can see Eric Namungalu, thank you for coming for second day, and so is Grace Lamuno, my former seatmate in 5H somewhere. Jogo Tabu Peter, thank you for joining us, and so is Rwanda Charles. The Honorable Medad Segona, we appreciate you being here with us. Patricia Atim, Sandra Oyama, Selva Baidi, Stuart Kamia, Council Fred Biamokama, thank you for coming through. Friends, without much ado, let me take the opportunity of introducing a Peel household name. For many of us who are pursuing this career, a few years later, he will be branded the grandfather of public interest litigation in Uganda. Those of us who've heard of the amicus, some of us heard of amicus for the first time in 2016 during the Amama Mbabazi presidential petition. And one of the architects behind that initiative was Professor Christopher Mbazira. He even took it a notch higher. He carried amicus away from the court and went and established an amicus enterprise, which he will definitely talk about. That is how spirited he is when it comes to public interest litigation. So if you want farm produce, there is amicus enterprise to give you that farm produce. There's a lot, fish, everything. So even the people deep down in the village know about amicus. If it is not in the courts of law, at least it is through the different enterprises. He also doubles as the principal, School of Law, Makerere University. He is definitely the coordinator of the Public Interest Law Clinic, which offers a secretariat seat to the network of public interest lawyers. Allow me to invite Professor Mbazira to make his presentation. Professor, we are glad to have you. Lydian, could you kindly grant me sharing rights? Lillian, I can still share.
Thank you, Arthur, as you sort out the technology. I just want to thank you as well as UCLF for organizing this. Thank you so much. For a few years at the School of Law, we've tried to put the School of Law out there by ensuring that we contribute towards one of the key objectives of Makerere, which is community outreach and impacting on the community. I'm so happy to report that for the last 10 years now, we've been able to achieve quite a lot through partnerships of this nature and to actually impact on the community. We provide legal aid services, we support public interest litigation, we engage in legal literacy, we do research on a number of issues pertaining to access to justice. We do so many things in the direction of law reform. We also engage in international and local advocacy. And to me, that's the dream that I had, a law school that does all those things. And I'm so happy that our partnership with UCLF, which as indicated by the CEO, is something that was born at the school, has actually grown into something very, very big. I have no doubt that UCLF soon will go regional as well as international, the same thing that NetPeer is doing. So I was asked to say something about public interest litigation in Uganda, focusing particularly on the way that the Ugandan lawyers have chosen to take. In other words, is it the right approach that the Ugandan lawyers are using, or is there something that can be done differently? I just conferred with Arthur just a few minutes ago to find out how much presenters have gone into what public interest litigation is, and he informed that a lot was said yesterday regarding what PIL is. So I will not go so much into the basics of PIL, although it is important that as we start, we get to know actually what PIL entails. It has taken different forms, as you should have learned yesterday and through your other careers, I know. It has been pursued differently in different jurisdictions, but the bottom line is that litigation of this nature is intended to tackle challenges or problems that society faces. So there is an element of public interest. Of course, in some jurisdictions, it has been hijacked. We saw that in a case here where a certain entity tried to hijack PIL by litigating to contest provisions of a certain law that was promoting health and saying the provisions aren't considered because it was somehow taking away the business of that entity. That is something that we need to be mindful of. As much as the courts are open to everybody and we cannot be the gatekeepers, but we must stick to the purpose of PIL. So I can see my presentation is coming up. Yes, there it is. Okay. Arthur is here sorting out the technical issues. Yeah. Okay, I think we are there now. Okay, so we are going first. Can I use this key? Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Arthur. So very quickly, I won't go so much into the definition and concepts. A bit of context. A bit of context. Just a minute, my apologies. I just want to be sure I'm scrolling from the same computer. Arthur, just a minute. Okay. Because like you see, I've gone back to that page. It's not changing. There's a bit of a delay. Okay, apologies, our online participants. We are sorting out technical issues, but I'm going to proceed. I'm going to say something brief about the context in Uganda. I was saying I won't go so much into the history because I'm told that was done yesterday. The same applies to the legal framework and then the future. But in presenting the future, I will be so much interested in the strategy that Ugandan lawyers are adopting and what strategy we can apply. One thing that is for sure, and this is something that I've said several times, is that one needs to understand that public interest litigation is a form of science, in the sense that if it's a science, then one has to know the results that you want to achieve. And then you have to know the processes that you have to work through to achieve those results. So just imagine, I've used a graphic way of expressing this. If you're a scientist and you're in a laboratory, you desire to achieve a certain result. So as a result of that, you mix stuff depending on what you want to achieve. You subject them to certain temperatures if need be, and processes until you achieve what you want. So pills should also be used in the same way. So the starting point when you are preparing pill is where do I want to be. Definition-wise, pill is a form of litigation that uses the legal system to instigate change that affects the public. It precipitates social change through court-ordered decrees, and one key thing is that it goes beyond simply addressing the problems that an individual faces. We've looked at this in the context of distributive justice vis-a-vis corrective justice. Again, I won't go so much into that. There are standard definitions, of course, of pill. Again, I'm not going to labor so much on this because, again, it was looked at yesterday. But this is a form of litigation that has been taken up by people that are interested in seeing change. It has an interesting history. There are 2 or 3 countries that are key here, and this list has been growing. We see pill in the US, we see pill in India, we see pill in Canada, we see pill in South Africa, and now we see pill in a number of countries. In our region here, a lot has been done in Kenya to promote pill. What public interest litigation does, its objects are numerous depending on what one wants to achieve. One of which is challenging unfair legislative provisions, stopping marginalization of a group. It could be dealing with impunity. It could be challenging state action or, in some cases, inaction. It could be stopping ongoing violations. But there are other objects that may not necessarily be indicated here, depending on what one wants to achieve. We've also seen pill being taken up as if it's a beauty contest, in the sense that some lawyers take up pill. It is the quickest way to get publicity. Whether that is a good or bad thing, we are going to discuss that later. But it's one of those shortcuts that lawyers, organizations sometimes use, and one wonders whether that is ethical. But we can get back to that later. I've mentioned historically where it started. We usually say it was born in the US, it was breastfed in India. In our context here, it was raised in South Africa. Some people have said it is dying somewhere. I don't think so, but it is still being raised in a number of African countries. And I must say, interesting things are happening on the continent as far as public interest litigation is concerned. And this has resulted from a number of factors. One, the training that lawyers are getting. We are here now. We've done quite a lot at the School of Law in Makerere and other universities as well. I know we are working in partnership with UCU. We've worked in partnership with KIU. We've worked in partnership with IU, Cavendish, and other universities to actually promote public interest lawyering, not just public interest litigation, but public interest lawyering. And as a result of that, as lawyers get to know what this form of litigation is, as they get the skills, as the universities include this in their teaching, as the judiciary embraces peer, it is something that is growing quite a lot. As I mentioned, I'm going to skip a lot in terms of the history, but we know that different jurisdictions have contributed differently historically to this form of litigation. For instance, when we look at South India, what comes out is that India was the first to liberalize rules of standing, procedural flexibility. There are so many examples of procedural flexibility where the Indian judges actually ignored standard procedure for instituting suits and accepted suits to be filed by letters, by postcards, and sometimes the judges themselves would actually institute cases. We see remedial flexibility in India. We see creative and activist interpretation of legal and fundamental rights in order to promote the public interest. So that is India. I think I need your support here. Okay. Yes. So that is India. Oh, internet is off. Eh? It's off. So don't let it off.
No, yeah.
Akanonyo. Somewhere. Apologies once again. We are having some technical glitches. Yeah. After it appears I'm not in position to scroll my PowerPoint. On colleagues online, just a minute. We need to sort out something. As the technical issues are sorted out, just to commend colleagues that are doing quite a lot in the profession. There are quite a number of colleagues that have done a lot in the legal profession to promote peer. It is not one of those engagements that pays a lot of money, but at the same time, it's an engagement that brings a lot of satisfaction. We also commend members of the bench, the judges, justices at different levels that have also embraced litigation of this nature. We are receiving quite interesting decisions from the courts, but at the same time, we are also receiving some interesting decisions in a negative manner. But one sees that judicial officers are also trying to understand this form of litigation. I was saying something about India and its contribution to peer. Let me have my slide. The next. Yeah. So that's what India has done. We see from India, one goes to South Africa, a country that has had a history of racial oppression, ingrained in society, but characterized by a number of social movements and struggles emerging. And what we see coming out of this in South Africa is that there was a radical legal transition in 1994 up to 96, when the new constitution was adopted, which brought in a progressive approach to human rights. It brought in economic, social, and cultural rights, and it created room for public interest litigation. In the context of Uganda, we need to understand our history in the sense that we are country that has a common law legacy, and that common law legacy is constraining in a number of respects. It has been constraining, especially when it comes to things like remedial flexibility, locus standi, and things like that. However, in 1995, we see a radical change in Uganda by the adoption of the 1995 Constitution with Article 50, which empowers any person that alleges that their fundamental or other rights have been infringed to approach the courts of law. I'm sure you looked at that yesterday. Article 137 as well, that empowers the Constitutional Court to interpret and invalidate any law or action or mission, declare any omission that is unconstitutional to be so. So the legal framework has been growing. We've had issues regarding the proper approach, the question of whether it should be a petition or plaint. Some of these issues are now history. My Lord Justice Ogola is here. I know during his time they struggled a lot in the courts with the question of interpretation versus enforcement, something that is now clearer with the Human Rights Enforcement Act. And there was the question of the jurisdiction of the court, again, between the distinction between the jurisdiction of the High Court vis-a-vis the Constitutional Court, contradicting jurisprudence there from Ismail Serugo, the Alenio case and other cases. And interestingly, even when sometimes the law appears to be clear here through the judgment, again, now and again in the court, we see this question coming back. But hopefully the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which I know my colleague here, Emmanuel, is going to be presenting on later, probably has sorted this. But again, when you interface with judicial officers and discuss this law, you see that there are still a number of questions that need to be addressed. Now, the jurisprudential trends that we've seen, we saw the first cases in the 90s, where the courts, in spite of the new constitution then, and its Article 50, there are judges that still stuck to the strict approach, especially to standing. But later, when we see, especially environmental litigation, we see judges beginning to relax. Then we see cases of Salvatore Abuki, where we see the preparedness of the courts to actually invalidate legislation, something that was new at the time. Then later we see Greenwatch instituting a number of cases, environmental litigation especially. This was the time where advocacy for environmental justice was very strong at the international level, and there were so many entities that were supporting this, and so many cases came to court as a result of that. What surprises me, though, is that there is now a lot of advocacy at the international level to deal with the problem of climate change, but we don't see climate change related litigation growing as much as environmental litigation did in the early 2000s and late 2000s under Greenwatch and other entities, including TEEN. Then we saw the time of equality jurisprudence, where some cases came to court brought by such entities as FIDA, Uganda Women Lawyers Association. Later we see MIFUMI, we saw Law and Advocacy for Women doing a number of cases that were promoting equality, in other words, enforcing Article 21 of the Constitution. Again, I don't know what explains this. Arthur, Netpir, and UCDF, this is something that you may want to interest yourself in. This litigation again has disappeared. Equality jurisprudence. Do we now say that our society is more equal than it was when this litigation was done? I think it's not. There is a lot of inequality and social injustice that needs to be the subject of litigation. Now we see what I describe as a recent boom, where for some time we had the political question doctrine in petition 16 of brought by Center for Health, Human Rights and Development. but later the Supreme Court reverses that. Could we go back to the slide before? Yeah, but later the Supreme Court reverses that, and then we see a number of cases coming to court. And then 2016, when we did the amicus curiae, again opening up another door for public interest litigation, and this is a procedure that is growing so much that the judiciary itself picked interest in it, and the judiciary itself has actually come up with rules on amicus. I don't know that the rules are yet to be formally adopted, but I was part of that process. But also looking at the Human Rights Enforcement Act, it also has provisions that promote amicus. I'm not going to run through the Human Rights Enforcement Act because my colleague is going to do that. But one of the key features is immunity, personal liability, and immunity. I know my colleague is going to run through that. Progressive realization also integrated in Section 13 and other provisions. Now, I want to come to the crux of my presentation, which is the question of the future. Where does the future take us? And for me, where the future takes us, we have to reflect on what we've done correctly and what we need to do. My conclusion, having done research and having been part of this process practically, is that we are slowly overcoming some of the obstacles that have constrained public interest litigation. But there is a lot that still needs to be done, something that lawyers have not been doing. Initiatives such as this, NetBill is doing a lot here to fix this. I know other entities have come on board. We've worked with, for instance, the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, again, to try to fix this, and other entities that are doing this. One thing that has been emerging is that lawyers are not adequately preparing for peer. People are taking cases to court, yes. It is an area that is growing, but lawyers are not doing enough to actually prepare their cases and present them. If I can go back to what I said at the start, in a scientific manner, what do you want to achieve and how do you proceed? So there are things that we need to know, one of which is case identification and preparation. How do you identify a case and thereby prepare for that case? Okay, my PowerPoint is stuck again. Let's go back to the slide before. Let's go back. Apologies to our colleagues online. Okay, the next slide. Yeah, so one of the key things that we need to understand as we enter this area of law is that emotional or spontaneous selection of cases can result into litigation of bad cases. And in some cases, actually, it can result into bad jurisprudence. So one has to avoid doing cases in an emotional manner. We've seen instances where, okay, something bad happens on a Friday, and by Monday, Tuesday, there is a suit in court, which is not properly prepared. We've seen that actually. And the suit is publicized, but it dies away slowly, or eventually when it is decided, it is jurisprudence that is not good. So it is very, very important that one invests time in determining what case you want to do. And there are prerequisites for case selection, which I want to run through quickly. First of all, you must have an object. Remember, I said it's a science. You must ask some questions. What do I want to achieve? And what you want to achieve among others, depends on your broader goal, your vision, mission, if you are working in an organization context. I know even the lawyers that are purely doing legal practice, you represent clients that must have a goal, that must have a vision. So you must know, what do I want to achieve broadly? How does this litigation contribute towards what I want to achieve? So meaning that whatever you do, if you're an organization, must be informed by the reason the organization was set up, what the organization intends to achieve, and the question of what does the strategic plan of the organization say. Why is this important? Because we've seen instances where another, and sometimes not do, so one achieve as an organization, and that informs you as far as preparing a litigation strategy is concerned. It's very, very important for lawyers and entities that are interested in doing appeal that you actually have a litigation strategy. What's your litigation strategy? What do you intend to litigate on in the next 4 years? What do you intend to achieve in the next 5 years? For instance, here we are using an example of this organization, LAPD. We look at its litigation goal. We look at its litigation agenda. You must have a litigation goal. You must have a litigation agenda. You must have litigation objectives. If we can scroll quickly. So, for instance, your litigation goal could be broadly to enhance access to justice for persons with disabilities in a barrier-free environment. That's just an example of what you can set as your litigation goal. That's before you even decide what cases you are going to do. You must have that. You can continue. You should also have a litigation agenda, which should then define your agenda objectives. So for instance, if your litigation goal is, as I've indicated, enhancing access to justice for PWDs in a barrier-free environment. Let's go back to the previous slide. Your litigation objectives then could be, one, to enhance access to justice for PWDs by litigating to remove both legal and practical barriers that hinder access to justice for PWDs and enjoyment of human rights. Then the second one could be to promote independent living for PWDs by litigating to remove barriers that constrain access by PWs to the physical environment. So these are just examples. You come from a broader goal, you have a litigation agenda, and then you have objectives. It means that's what is going to inform your litigation. If we can scroll. But once you have that, then you cannot start a case unless you've done research. Research is key. Research is key. You must invest a lot of time in research. Increasingly, lawyers don't want to do research. Increasingly, law students don't want to do research. We struggle quite a lot with law students when it comes to committing time to research. Some cultures have emerged.
How are you?
I know that we are struggling with in law schools, cultures of photocopiers, reading things through rumors, depending on the discussion groups and things like that. We no longer see lawyers, and we are pushing our students to do this. Go sit in a library and actually research and look at different decisions and different judgments and compare decision of one jurisdiction with that of another. Look at what scholars have said. Of course, research for litigation can be rapid, but research for litigation can also be structured. What do I mean by structured? You can research for a case for a year. You can research for a case for 2 years. You can research for a case for 5 years, depending on the nature of the case and the complexity of that case. Of course, I'm not discounting rapid research where something is urgent, but we need to know that whatever form it takes, research is key. And these are some of the questions you should. Is the question of what is the problem? There must be a problem. You get to solve a problem. Two, who is affected by the problem? So in other words, who is your victim and how is that victim affected? Is it a community? What's the nature of that community? How is the problem affecting them? You must research who is responsible. If there is a violation, who is responsible for this violation? In other words, you are trying to understand who your respondent or defendant is. And then you must also understand what the law says. So you are now moving into your legal argument. What does the law say? Then you must also go ahead and find out whether something has been done about the problem. Has there been a litigation before? What form has it taken? Has the litigation dealt with the problem? Has there been advocacy? Has there been research? You must ask what can be done. If nothing has been done, what can be done about the problem? You must ask, has the matter or related matter has been litigated before? You must also ask, and sometimes we don't want to ask this question as lawyers, the question of whether litigation is the best option. If it's not, what are the other strategies that one can use? There are instances where you can engage in research for a year, and the initial object of that research is to build a case. But it's normal after that research for you to conclude that litigation is not the best option. And there are so many instances where litigation is not the best option to deal with the problem. You must also research the feasibility of the case. Is the case feasible looking at the legal framework? Is the case feasible looking at the attitude of the judiciary? Is the case feasible looking at the levels of impunity? Is the decision likely to be complied with? Is the case morally feasible? There are instances where a case is immorally infeasible. It's not morally, it's infeasible in the sense that it could be a case that is going to be rejected by society, even when you get a good decision. So that you must go into that as well. You must look at comparative jurisdictions as this matter or similar matter has been litigated. You must do research, as I said at the start, with the interpretation and enforcement, which appears to be history, at least on paper. What is the required evidence? You must do research on the form of evidence that you are going to require. Is it going to be from experts? Is it going to be facts? How are those facts going to be adduced? Is the evidence coming from your client? Is it those situations where you actually need witness protection and things like that? And then you must engage in research on possible remedies. So as you can see, there is quite a lot that goes into researching a case that can go on for so many years or months or days, depending on the nature of the case. Now, stage 2, after we've researched our case and the research has returned results that show the case is feasible, there is a problem, there is a victim, there is a person who is responsible, the forum is there, the courts have the jurisdiction, morally the case is feasible, the remedies are there that we are likely to get, then we move to the second stage of case preparation. And at the stage of case preparation, there is quite a lot that needs to be done. There is quite a lot. You've already gone through questions of the problem it is, as I've mentioned. You now zero down and begin to determine, one, what are we going to litigate? What has the law returned? What has the case law returned? So what are we going to litigate? In other words, you are now determining the issues that you want to litigate on. There are instances where the problem is so big that you can't actually litigate the entire problem, but you can litigate the problem in bits. So you can decide that initially we are going to litigate on this. What forum are you going to use? Who is your respondent? You must also determine the resources that are required. And in addition, you must also determine the timing. When is it appropriate to do the litigation? We've seen, for instance, in our case here, if you need quick results, it's a very big mistake to refile a case when you are coming towards elections. If the case is not related to elections, because before you know it, the courts are going to be swamped with election petitions. Those election petitions are going to go on appeal. Be sure your case is not going to be touched for at least 2 years. And then as the case progresses, another election cycle comes in and things like that. So timing is also key. If one of the strategies that you've chosen, for instance, is one that requires a publicity of the case, you must also understand the times of the year where the media will not focus on you, but will focus on other more exciting things. So at preparation stage, you have already determined the appropriate forum through your research, but now you are concretizing on that in terms of the law, what the law says, the procedure, required evidence. We've looked at possible remedies. You must understand the likely impact of the case. As you prepare, you must also understand possible challenges and barriers that you are likely to face, and see how you are going to deal with that. There are cases where you are going to be opposed by the public. And if you think the case is worth taking, then you must know how you are going to deal with that. Do you have an advocacy strategy? Do you have a media strategy? There are instances where your barrier is the 10 cases where the judiciary is hostile. Sometimes it can be a big portion of the bench. Sometimes it can be a specific member of the judiciary, the bench, that is so hostile. Resource implications could be a problem. And then you must also determine the required partners that you need. Who are you going to partner with? Because you may not have all the resources. You may not have all the expertise that you need, and then you must consider the strategic direction that the case is going to take. It is very, very important as you prepare a case to assess your capacity. Do you have the requisite capacity? Lawyers sometimes think that they can do any form of case. But it's always good to admit your weaknesses. It's always good to admit the unique talents that others may have. It can be at an individual level. It can be at the level of an organization. One can come across an organization that has better resources, that has done research, that you can partner with to give you the information. You can sometimes discover that actually you need the legal expertise, you need the legal practitioners if you don't have them in your environment, and you may as legal practitioners that are ready to do this. And in terms of collecting evidence, some cases are so expensive in the paperwork that is involved that you need a lot of money. There's the question of the required expertise. I've already touched on that. The logistics available. You must also look at your capacity in terms of time. Do you have the time? I'm rushing through this quickly, just to catch up on time. You need to go through those steps. If I can go back to the previous slide, you need to go through all those steps as you prepare for your case. We've come from a stage where you have to define your litigation agenda broadly, that you have to engage in research, and we've seen the different considerations that one has to go through to ensure that you get good research. And if the research returns results that show that it's necessary for you to litigate. Then we've seen how you go about the litigation. So what is then happening is that slowly we are seeing well-researched cases coming to court. But at the same time, we're also seeing so many cases that are coming to court that are not properly researched, invested adequate time in actually preparing the case itself. So a case begins to roll and then there is no evidence. A case begins to roll, there is no strategy. A case begins to roll, it requires publicity, it is not there. A case begins to roll, it requires a certain special expertise to bring certain forms of evidence to court, and this is not happening. All this results from poor preparation. So if we are to move forward as lawyers that are interested in using public interest litigation, we have to, as I said at the start, we have to start being a science something, and they first determine what they want to achieve, then they work backwards. So we also need to determine that if we are going to litigate, is it law reform? Is it publicity? Is it a form of advocacy? Is it just providing information on a subject? Is it a question where we want to end an urgent a violation in a matter that is so urgent, and then we work backwards? How do we achieve that? Partnerships are key. Internal resource assessment, capacity is key. Capacity assessment is key in terms of resources, in terms of expertise, and then you go into the case pursuit. Thank you so much, Arthur. I think I'll leave it at this.
Clap. But luckily enough, he's still here for us to have that interaction. Those of us who are online, we have an opportunity to engage the good professor. And right after the professor, he shared the position of, okay, it doubles. He's an academic, but also appeal practitioner who has also been at the bar to argue some of these cases. He says he will no longer see the equality litigation. It has disappeared. Was how focus changed. Nothing is coming out of the climate change. Now, the controversial subject that I want to interest us in right now is the issue of vaccine mandate. The issue of vaccine mandate. With all due respect to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, a pronouncement was made yesterday by the Uganda Human Rights Commission. My humble opinion, very unfortunate pronouncement. But I know these are issues that probably we need to take to the bench for the bench to decide on whether we can actually force somebody to undergo a medical procedure. We appreciate the need for us to protect ourselves, but also protect others from ourselves. But those are arguments that we need to do what? To take to court. So I'm looking forward to, Professor, in your next presentation, probably 2022, the new boom will be COVID to that boom of cases courtesy of COVID-19. Our friends who are online, I'm waiting to see the hands, I'm waiting to see the comments, if any, on the presentation that has been made. something that came to cross my mind when the good professor was presenting, who is actually going to court? From the barrage of cases that I have seen go to court, it appears the lawyers have taken on the place of the citizens. Yes, the lawyers have taken on the place of what? Of the citizens. And we end up playing both. I am the applicant, or I'm the petitioner, and at the same time I'm the what? The legal representative. Professor, isn't that dangerous for the growth and even the approach we shall take in as far as this is concerned? I've also fallen victim. Only that I'm usually guarded. When I decide to go as an applicant, I will remain as an applicant and leave the affairs to my legal representatives. Though at a certain point, I will influence the approach of my legal representative. And probably we need to take a census of the matters that have gone to court in the context of PIL over the last 5 years. I stand to be corrected, but you will find that practically every matter there has, and I don't know whether that is good right of the lawyer to go out as a spirited citizen. And Professor, we've seen some of these decisions coming from court where the bench lashes out to these overzealous busybodies. That's something that I would invite you to make mention to. I don't know whether we have any comments on the presentation from the academic stroke practitioner before we cross to the views of the bench. Are we actually litigating, or are we just burdening the bench? Yes, John Mary.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I just wanted to make a small comment with regard to the time factor, as Dr. mentioned in his presentation. He mentioned that it is important to prepare, and that a poorly, I don't remember the exact words of the slide, but it had something with a poorly prepared litigation, then it can turn out to be a disaster, and rightly so. However, from my work, I realize nowadays the problems of society keep evolving, and that's why you see, for example, when you ask yourself what happened to the equality movement, when you look at the beginning of PIL, it comes at a time when we have, especially in Uganda, we have a new constitution, and the problems largely are constitutional and things to do with policy and legal construct as such. Now, the trend is that the problems, nowadays the parliament is a little bit more cautious, and the processes of passing those are a little bit more rigorous, except for those that are political. We have a semblance of sane laws largely. They may not be accurately so, but largely. Now, the problems of society are evolving a bit to what we call the acts lowercase, where you see the cases involving actions and omissions in the lowercase. Now, the challenge with that is that they have statutes have time limitation that bar when and time limits within which you can institute cases. Now, the challenge, and that is why you see we have very many cases that are poorly drafted and are being poorly litigated, because the trend recent is that largely we are no longer litigating acts uppercase and we are litigating acts lowercase. Now, because of time limits, and that's why this is why you're saying it is now lawyers mostly litigating these cases as opposed to organizations. Now, because of the time constraints that are involved and statutory limits on when to institute suits, you see a rushed appeal, so to say, and that is why you are having this kind of poorly drafted, in the words using the words of court, poorly drafted, poorly litigated cases. But also, I also realized that you see, we're also suffering with this with the Gamba-Nogu syndrome in the country. We have a very large section of society that is so detached from reality, and we have created a class in society that is living so well. They are so detached from what is going on, and this, for me, I think this is affecting also a section of some of the people in the judiciary. And what you realize, for example, the judge, whereas it is his court, is equally an officer of court, just as the advocate in the court. Now, when the judge in a appeal matter seems to be an adjudicator of disputes and not an officer of court looking at a case of justice, then you have the strict regard to procedure, strict regard to laws, and all those other things that come into play. And then you see what would have been a good case may be dismissed or lost because the judge himself or herself is not equally vested in the quest for justice, other than the interpretation of statutes. So there is also the question of this sort of judicial activism, where the judge should also see himself or her an adjudicator of disputes. When a case, for example, is poorly drafted or rushed, but it is in public interest, then what is your role as a judicial officer? To interpret statute, to apply a strict code of procedure, or to come to the reality and look at the public interest in the case and decide with that view in mind. Yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you, John Mary. There is a comment coming in from Diana Ahumuza. Question: do we also see a case of the first to go to court, be the first in court before another jumps on the occasion, and then what is its implication, especially for me, who will decide to devote time to do the research, prepare, and then come to court? Thank you, Diana, for that. And yes, I can see Daniel Wariemera's hand raised. Yes, Chairperson, Advisory Committee, NetPil, Emeritus. The floor is yours. Kindly unmute and shoot.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to counter Prof, my academic mentor, Prof Mbazira's view that actually they are busybodies, and if something happens, it happens on Friday, they rush to court on Monday and file a case. I think in my humble view, in view of the idea that at times we may go to court, not necessarily because we're going to court to win the appeal case, but we're going to court to raise debate, the conversation around the issue that is teething to society. I think there is a value there. Obviously, the downside is that what Professor exactly has mentioned is that you may get decisions that may take a very long time to overturn, but decisions that may not be overturned anyway in the long term. However, there is a value that if you rushed to court Yes, you are not that prepared. Yes, you have some few things lacking because you've not done the adequate research for 6 months, 1 year. But then you are raising the level of debate about the topic that is there, the recurring problem that is there, that needs to be discussed, that needs to be talked about. So I think whereas if you flip the coin, you have these bad decisions from such knee-jerk public interest litigation cases, you also have advantages to that. So you must sit down and weigh what the pros and cons of that strategy are. And I do not, if indeed Prof. Mbazira said that it's a bad idea for us to do that as public interest lawyers, I would humbly and respectfully disagree. There are situations where you need that approach. There are situations where you need the approach where you have to do research for over a year and strategize. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel Wariemera, for that opinion. And this reminds me, last week we had a forum with the Center for Strategic Litigation in Zanzibar. And at some point we had a debate on whether we should actually be looking at just public interest litigation, or we talk of public interest lawyering. On the question of sometimes, and the good professor did ask us to ask ourselves, is the best move to go to court, or is there another avenue? And the moment we go for that other avenue, then are we still litigating, or should we talk of public interest lawyering? So when Counsel Daniel Wariemera says that at some point we need to go to court to cause the debate, even if, then I'm inclined to say probably we should be promoting public interest lawyering as opposed to sticking to public interest litigation. Patricia Atim says yes, like when and Kale Kaihura and others, we had to dash to court. Yes. Patricia is reminding us of that incident where a group of lawyers dragged the former IGP and officers to court. At that particular time, it was not an issue of whether the court will actually listen to the matter, on whether a decision will come, but it was important for them to awaken the consciousness of the public, but also test the Anti-Torture Act. Professor, the floor is yours for your responses. I'm aware that you have another forum that should be beginning in the next 3 minutes, so kindly do respond.
Thank you so much, Arthur, and thank you so much, colleagues, for the comments. I'm going to start with the question which you raised at the start, Arthur, where you say, or the comment that you made regarding lawyers taking the space of citizens. The most important thing to me is that a case must have flesh and blood. What do I mean by flesh and blood? A case must have people that are affected taking the forefront. It's not your case, and indeed we've had so many cases that have been defeated for being moot, or sometimes even when technically the case is moot, it may rub off the judiciary or the judge negatively if the judge thinks the case is abstract. So it's always very important. Yes, lawyers can take that space, but it's better that the lawyers front people that are affected. If you are litigating a case to do with, let's say, limited access to education for a particular community, debatwa, surely debatwa should be at the forefront. Debatwa should be seen in court. Debatwa should appear in the court papers, as opposed to a Kampala-based lawyer who is doing this in an abstract manner. But of course, the problem is that there's this concept of celebrity lawyers now. As I said, Peel is one short way of becoming a celebrity lawyer and instantly appearing in the news and addressing the media and appearing to be so intelligent even when the case is so abstract. I think we need to desist from that and know that these are not our causes. These are causes of a particular group, that we are a vulnerable group or a group that is suffering an injustice. And this goes beyond individual lawyers. It even goes to organizations. Personally, I oppose this approach. I know so many people love it, where you see a case, the first applicant is an organization. The second applicant is another organization. Applicant number 5 is another organization. And the Kapua vulnerable group appears number 7, somewhere at the bottom. So the case is so an organization and others. The poor victims appears others. I would reverse that. I would rather have the victims come first and then these organizations that are supporting the process actually come later. But of course, I know so many people are going to oppose me here on this. If I say this somewhere, I'm doing this for fundraising strategies to up the profile of the organization. But I would prefer that. On the question of timing, I think a lot has been said on this. John Mary, you made so many comments. I may not be able to respond to all of them, but some of them touched on the judiciary, the bench. A few years ago, we discovered that a lot was being done in forums of this nature to prepare the lawyers to do litigation, but nothing was being done on the side of the bench. So as much as the lawyers were becoming activists, they were getting the skills to do litigation of this nature, they were facing a hostile bench. So the strategy then was also to engage the bench, and there are many things that were done to engage the bench. And some members of the bench came for trainings of this nature. There was a partnership between different entities and the Judicial Training Institute. Then slowly we started seeing the bench coming on board as well. On the issue you raised, the issue of changes in the nature of the violations or abuses, changes in the way that litigation is being, that laws are being promulgated. They are not as explicitly unconstitutional as they used to be. And then the barriers of time. I agree with you on the barriers of time, but I think it's also our responsibility to litigate some of these legal barriers. You talked about limitation. There is jurisprudence from a number of jurisdictions, including our own, that actually constitutional matters or matters to do with the violation of human rights have no time limit. So we may want to litigate again to remove some of those barriers. Diana Humuza, on the case of one wants to be the first in court, I think I've touched on that, the problem of celebrity lawyers, the problem of organizations profiling themselves. That's why I'm so happy that at NetPil we adopted the strategy. Many people, Arthur, have been asking, I think you get this question so many times, why isn't NetPil doing cases? Why haven't we seen NetPil as an applicant in a matter? It was a deliberate decision because these are not our cases. So we would rather support victims. We front the victims. We've had so many cases we've supported in the background as NetPil. We would rather support the victim who is the flesh and blood that is actually suffering the violation instead of affronting an organization all the time, which organization may rub off some judicial officers as a busy body. Daniel and Patricia, I agree with you. Let me not be misunderstood. This is my last response. Let me not be misunderstood. I'm not saying you cannot rush to court. My point is that if you decide to rush to court, let it be a deliberate strategy. Let it be deliberate. That you've weighed the case and it is a case where you think you need to rush to court. And that you've actually prepared that. Kaihura case, I was part of the preparation team. I know why we decided to rush to court. But I'm also saying there are cases where people have rushed to court in circumstances where they should not. Every time I say research and research, immediately I see resistance. Every time you tell people to do a case, you need to research, you need to take off a lot of time, I see immediate resistance. Why? Because to be open with you lawyers, you don't want to do research. But there are those cases that deserve research, structured research, but also those urgent cases where you have to rush to court quickly. But let that be a deliberate decision. Let that be done after you've weighed the risks, the options available to you, and you think that the option that is available to you is to actually rush to court. We've seen so many cases where people hurriedly take cases to court. Nothing comes out of it. They lose interest in the matter. And then you see the case which was on the front page of every newspaper going to the fourth page and then disappearing, and then the lawyers losing interest in the matter, and then in a key ceremony, a low-key ceremony, the case is dismissed and the jurisprudence is there, negative one, and you don't know about it until you want to litigate a similar matter or a matter where the law in that case is relevant. Then you discover there is this case that was never pursued at all, or it was poorly done. Why? There is also that culture that especially people that are doing this for money, there is also that culture that the client never releases the money, not until you are waiving pleadings. No, pleadings, we've filed. Not until you are waiving pleadings, we've filed. It's only then that the client release the money. I think that's a culture that we need to change. Arthur, thank you so much. I'll leave it at that.
Our friends, another hand clap for Professor Christopher Mbazira, who is the coordinator of the Public Interest Law Clinic, the one that gives a secretariat seat to the network of public interest lawyers. Thank you so much, Professor Christopher Mbazira, for your time, even amidst your busy schedule. It is always healthy to take a break, is it? Yes. And I'm going to allow us a 5 minutes break. 5 minutes break, it is healthy. And then we shall return to listen to the wisdom of the gray-haired Honorable Justice Ogola. 5 minutes break, and then we'll return. Thank you. I'll propose we carry on. We are still teasing out the question on whether, through public interest litigation, we are actually doing the proper thing, or are we simply burdening the courts? And in the earlier session, we had the views and opinions of an academic who also doubles as a man in the trenches touching public interest litigation. Friends, we are privileged also to have experiences shared from the bench. If you do not know Justice James Ogola, I'm even pleased that, and so there is a lot, but this I picked from a recording that was done in 2019. The Honorable Justice did appear on People and Power on NBS. And the subject of talk on that day was delivering justice fairly and impartially. From that recording, he makes a confession that the first time he stepped in court was when he had gone to adjudicate. Interesting experience. Not to argue cases, but to adjudicate. In short, he was born and called to adjudication, while some of us were born and called to fill in. Justice James Ogola first start into his career placed him as a state attorney in the Attorney General's chambers, as a senior draftsman drafting Uganda's laws during the Idi Amin era. A good number of us were not yet born. He's had the opportunity of being at the helm of the Judicial Service Commission as chairperson. He's been one of the Uganda's Elders Forum. Ooh. Now, one line I picked from that telecast. This is what he says. As a court judge, one needs to be very careful while on the bench, since it matters what messages are sent out to the people in court. I wish this is a message we could play and replay for everybody that sits on the bench currently. And then he says, much as he's retired from the bench, this is what he says. He does not miss it. He doesn't miss the bench. He says he has been released from prison. But, he says, the work of a judge lives even after their grave. And the judge will be held accountable someday. And I'm sure there is no better forum than this for him to come and share his experiences when we talk of public interest litigation, the views all in the islands of the bench. Friends, join me in welcoming the Honorable Justice James Ogola. If you've discovered, I've steered clear of using the word retired because as far as I'm concerned, he has chosen not to retire. Each day I see him, he is refiring. Your Honorable Justice, you're most welcome. And you will use that microphone. It has been vaccinated.
Thank you. Oh, sit down, please. Sit down. I didn't know you were standing. That's one of the things I learned when I first went to court. As he says, I had never been in a court except to swear in as a in there.
Then I went off to do my own things, legal, but not judicial. When I came back 30 years later, I was made a judge. First case, murder. And I shook from the soles of my feet to the up here. What do I do? That I want to tell you a little tidbit about is how does we need public interest litigation for this one. How does the work of a judge live after them? As principal judge, I went to Luzira to visit the prison and to preach a sermon to the condemned section. When I arrived, I didn't know what to expect. I expected people who are totally gone. I mean, in tears and rags and ashes and so on. No. We found a team of people with the drums singing and dancing Christian songs. Said I was in the wrong section. I said, no, this is the one. At the end of it all, one of them put up their hand to ask me, Judge, we here have now come to terms with our fate. We do not care if the hangman knocks at the door 5 a.m. any day of the week. We will go. Because we know we are going up to glory. And the minute we get there, we will ask the good Lord, say, I don't know what he said, Lord, Father, whatever. If Judge so and so comes here, let me know. God will say, why? Yeah, I have a matter with him. Him and me and you, God. This is what's the matter. He sent me here prematurely and wrongfully and fairly and all of that. And it struck me to say, what we do here professionally on the bench will be appealed there when we arrive. Whether you arrive in heaven or the other place, you are still damned. Be careful, the work we do here lives after us sometimes. The substantive content of how you as counsel prepare your plans and your strategies and your work for public interest litigation is for the distinguished panel of your own professional colleagues at the bar. Some of them have been here. Professor Mbazira has just left, and he has presented and unpacked a great deal of what the nuts and bolts are, research and so on is legislative drafting, and its cousin, statutory interpretation. I will therefore share with you terms of interpretation, especially of constitutional instruments, the rule of law, and the great human rights arena, including PIL. That's my specialty. How about my vocation on the bench? It took two particular turns. Number one, the Commercial Court of Uganda. Having established it and funded it in around 1999-2000, I headed it, the Commercial Court, around 2002-2004, and built its physical you now see in town. And we did build that around 2003, 2004, just as I was becoming the principal judge of Uganda. So I have a vocation in the commercial side of, I have a first of COMESA and East Africa. I was a judge in the COMESA Court of Justice, probably the longest serving judge there, from 1999 to 2013, thereabouts. Then I became a Justice of Appeal from 2009 to 2016 at the ESCJ, East African Court of Justice. From these two courts, I hope I'll be able to share some judicial experience of the regional courts in our jurisdiction, and particularly so how these courts handle public interest litigation. But first, let us seek to define what public interest litigation is, and more importantly, what it is not. Black's Law Dictionary, I found two very interesting definitions there. Number one, definition of what is the public welfare. Number two, what is public interest? What is the public interest? Public welfare is defined along these lines, and let me quote: the prosperity, well-being, or convenience of the public, all community as distinguishable from the advantage of an individual, unquote. It embraces the primary social interests of society, order, morals, economic interest, and non-material and political interests. Public welfare we are still talking about. And what is public welfare is not a static definition. It develops in tandem with the development of society's civic life to catch up with the latest regulatory purview of modern society. So for instance, right now, the definition of public welfare has been extended to the regulations for the promotion of economic welfare and public convenience. That, for me, is the starting point, public welfare. Then there is the heart of the matter, namely, what is the public interest. Again, Black's dictionary defines public interest as, quote, something in which the public at large has some pecuniary interest, legal rights, or liabilities are affected. It does not mean anything so narrow as mere curiosity or the interests of the particular localities in question. Rather, it is interest generally in the affairs of local, state, unquote. It's evident then that the one permanent element that distinguishes public interest litigation from all other litigation is the fact that the public at large has a distinguishable interest in that litigation. As against, if not purely individuals' interest. In all other, in public litigation, there may well be more than one individual. There may be several individuals or even group or groups of individuals or corporate entities. Nonetheless, their interest is peculiar only to themselves as against the public at large. In a way, those who litigate on behalf of the public at large are making a personal sacrifice of some sort. The result of their litigation will redound to the public at large or a section thereof. It will not redound exclusively to their own personal or individual benefit. The individual litigant in a public interest litigation invests his or her time, effort, and resources to achieve a result that will be beneficial to all. It's no doubt because of this sacrificial nature or element of it that the courts do not condemn to costs that kind of litigant, even if in the end. Here, the principle of costs follow the event is not enforced against the unsuccessful public interest litigant. That obviously speaks to the judicial recognition of the singular importance of the public interest litigant. There are many instances of what is the public interest, but fundamental to them all is the public realization of the underlying stratum of the values, virtues, traditions, and morals of a particular society. For Uganda, these values, morals, and so on are captured in the 1995 Constitution of the country. Speaking about them, Emeritus Chief Justice Odoki, the architect of the Constitution, says in his book, whose title is The Search for a National Consensus, at page 289, He says that, and I quote, "The objective of formulating a new constitution for the country was to produce a constitutional framework based on the views of the people of Uganda, and a constitution which reflected their values, their norms, and their aspirations for the future." Unquote. All these were neatly captured in the heart of the Constitution's national goals and directive principles of state policy, which are to guide state agencies in the arena of governance. It is straight law in Uganda that when interpreting the Constitution, or for that matter, any statute at all of that importance, these national guides and directive principles are to be weighed in the equation to guide the court. And this is particularly necessary in public interest litigation, in which oftentimes the issues turn on the question, where is the public interest in this conflict, in this dispute? Oftentimes, the public interest is embedded in the nation's underlying values, virtues, norms, traditions, and aspirations. The 1995 Constitution is noteworthy, among others, for the innovations it introduced into the body politic of the nation. Among the major innovations, and innovations here mean things that are in this Constitution which are not in other constitutions traditionally, whether here or anywhere else. Things that came in for the first time for a particular reason. Some of these most important ones are the following. Number one, the Constitution makes it a duty of state organs, of leaders, and of citizens to protect the Constitution at all times, to respect its supremacy, all able-bodied persons, I believe, so that they can protect this Constitution militarily if need be. That's an innovation in this Constitution, not in many others elsewhere. Two, second innovation. The Constitution also introduced a liberal and comprehensive Bill of Rights, guaranteeing the universally recognized fundamental rights and freedoms to all persons and disadvantaged groups, in establishing effective institutions and processes for the protection and enforcement of those basic human rights. Of course, we now have that Act of Parliament, which has come in a big way to enforce those human rights. Someone is going to speak about that in the course of these training sessions, so we leave it to them to bring out the nitty-gritties of that Human Rights Enforcement Act. Third innovation is strengthening of the independence of the judiciary with the financial autonomy. This financial autonomy was additional to what already existed by way of administrative autonomy, that is separation from the Ministry of Justice, stands alone as a judiciary, and professional autonomy of the judges' individual and collective corporate judgments. They're answerable to nobody, no other person or authority can come and tell them what to do in reaching their judgment. With the advent of the passage of the Judiciary Act, the judiciary now stands on a pedestal of its own, administratively, professionally, financially, and even structurally. All this redounds to the effectiveness of the judicial process vis-a-vis, especially, public interest litigation. For this kind of litigation, as indeed for all constitutional litigation, the judiciary needs an assured backbone. And those are introduced in that Constitution. The Constitution also introduced, of course, Article what article is it? Substantive justice. 200 and something.
126.
That one says for you, look very carefully at here. What are they arguing before you? Are they arguing the technicality of this or that, or this affidavit? Is it dated? Is it signed? Is it that or not? All which are important. All which assure fair process. But when weighed against the substance of the matter before you, how do they weigh out when you put them on a mizani? Technicalities against substantive justice. And this issue is a big issue for the bench when it comes especially to PIL. It's something you're talking about the general public, the citizenry at large, their interest in all the foundational arrangements of state. When you are faced with that, you're the bench. Are you going to be fumbling with the technical issues of affidavit and this or the other? Or are you going to go to the heart of the matter? Find a way to rearrange the technicalities, of course. Don't disregard them, don't throw them out. But find a way to get to the heart of the matter, because the public at large is out there waiting for a solution of substance. Number 4, innovations, introduction into the Constitution of express provisions to protect and preserve the environment, a cardinal arena for public interest litigation. For the first time, we put it in the Constitution and said, protect and preserve the environment. And Professor Mbazira was sharing with us that that one is now settled law. Not much arguments here or there. What is now bringing in some argument is climate change, which is a cousin of environmental law. It's probably part and parcel of it, but in that area. Innovation number 5 in our Constitution was the establishment of institutions to promote good governance, accountability, probity, and administrative justice, including the leadership code and the introduction of the IGG framework. 6, creation of a host of politically neutral zones, i.e. constitutional commissions, to provide independent, professional, and expert service and advice on public service appointments, elections, human rights, ethics, and integrity. These zones were created and expressly put into the Constitution. But as you can already see from their very definition, public interest litigation. Promotion of good governance and probity, as well as professional delivery of the public services, are an area of immense public interest. It's naturally fertile field for spawning public interest litigation. The courts, the bench, therefore, take extra special interest in litigation touching these particular areas which are rich in public interest litigation. Those are 6, 1 or 2 more, but these to me are the heart of the matter in our 1995 Constitution. Let me share with you how the bench generally looks at a case that comes in with elements of public interest. I've headed it a liberal bent for the bench. Each case before the court is of course determined on its own merits and demerits. There's never a straitjacket where one cloth fits all. Nonetheless, it's quite evident that in public interest litigation, especially those that touch the arena of human rights or environmental protection, the bench will tend to lean to the side of liberality. A case in point here is Onyango Bo against Attorney General. It was Constitutional Appeal number 2200. Court in that case held, and I quote, protection of guaranteed rights is a primary objective of the Constitution. Limiting their enjoyment is an exception to their protection and is therefore a secondary objective. Although the Constitution provides for both, it's obvious that the primary objective must be dominant. It can be overridden only in the exceptional circumstances that give rise to that secondary objective. In that eventuality, only minimal impairment of the enjoyment of the right strictly warranted by the exceptional circumstances is permissible. The exceptional circumstances set out in Clause 1 of Article 43 are the prejudice or violation of protected rights of others and prejudice or breach of social values categorized as public interest. Unquote. So the court, the bench, will very generally take a liberal approach to looking at the case before it that raises public interest issues, human rights issues, rule of law issues. Another piece to share are the canons of interpretation. How will the bench generally look at interpreting the instruments that are brought before it in public interest litigation. These are by far liberal, very liberal. They are liberal, first, the better to effectively bring out the values and virtues and norms and aspirations of the general citizenry of the country. That's one reason why the courts will generally take the liberal stand to bring these things out more effectively. Second, they are liberal to accord with the general liberal rule of interpretation of constitutions. Constitutional provisions are generally and habitually interpreted liberally as against strictly. Constitutions are a social political contract with we, the people. They are therefore interpreted with a bias to enlarge rather than to constrict the people's enjoyment of their God-given rights. And this must go back to things like the American experience, which brings into focus the liberality of this approach. The American philosophy, in their Declaration of Rights and so on, eloquently proclaimed that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. But among these are the right to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. That being a cardinal tenet for the social contract, it becomes self-evident indeed that the people's basic rights cannot be curtailed save by clear, succinct, express wording of the Constitution. Where there is any doubt or cloud in the text, where there is any fog or mist in the meaning of a constitutional provision, the bench will bend towards that meaning which enlarges rather than constricts the rights of the citizenry. The public interest demands that such be the case. It is for this reason that the 1995 Constitution contains two distinct articles that give the citizen locus standi, if you will, or jurisdiction over constitutional litigation and so on. There's Article 50, of which you are all very much aware, that brings in the individual who alleges that their rights have been trampled to come without much ado and litigate. There's then Article 137, which also comes into play. Professor Mbazira did touch on those two, so I need not belabor them anymore. Let's perhaps end this way, with the two public interest cases from the jurisdiction of especially the East African Court of Justice. One case, and you can find this in the East African ESCJ law reports, I don't remember the exact numbering and so on, but it's Anyang Nyong'o. Anyang Nyong'o came to the ESCJ with one case it ended in something like 10 or 12. So you have to look carefully which particular one this one is. If you do your research there, look for the one where we gave the judgment in Nairobi rather than in Arusha. And I wrote the lead judgment in there. And there, the basic issue was the government of Kenya refused to pay costs to a successful litigant, Anyang' Nyong'o. And they gave as their grounds that to do so would be to denude the public purse. They argued that the payment of costs to Anyang' Nyong'o would have to come from the nation's consolidated fund. And that in itself was a matter of public interest. To take money out of consolidated fund is, they argued, a matter of public interest. What was the background to this whole thing? East Africa has a legislature, IALA. Members of IALA are, by the Treaty of East Africa, elected by and from members of the individual parliaments in the partner states. It has to be an election. And on that occasion, Kenya somehow brought out 9 persons to be members of IALA, but without an election. The treaty requires that the whole parliament, say of Kenya or Uganda, produces the 9 people, but mindful of the parties in parliament. The ruling party, the opposition parties should be a representative group of 9 that are elected. Kenya on that occasion, through its president, simply named, I don't know, 5 names from here, 3 names from there, something like that. And there was no election. So Anyang' Nyong'o, who has been on the opposition and a candidate for membership of IALA, came to this African court to challenge the so-called election. And the court agreed and upheld him, said, you're right, and therefore there was no election. The process was flawed. Its results could not and would not be countenanced by the court, and therefore the resulting 9 members must not be sworn in, and so on and so forth. So Anyang' Nyong'o got his costs, but the government of Kenya said, no, we are not going to give you costs. And they made the argument that I told you about, that the money to pay this would come from the Treasury Consolidated Fund. And such an event is a matter of public interest. We of the bench looked at all of that, said this is a very ingenious argument, but if we go by it, then when would anybody ever be paid costs? Since any litigation against the Attorney General would redound into the Consolidated Fund paying costs. The government would never, ever pay. Even here, when you sue the Attorney General, the money that is paid to you if you're successful as costs comes from the Consolidated Fund. So we hit back, the bench hit back and said, no, no, this is nonsense. A government that really, really believes in the rule of law must be one that is able, willing, and clearly meets its obligations, state obligations, including costs. But one which hides behind this kind of argument, sorry, we cannot countenance that. So in a sense, that's one area where you cannot say that the public interest is at play. That's one case. Second case that I can share with you, again from the East African Court, is the Serengeti National Park. I'm sure many of you know about the Serengeti National Park. It's so well known. But it's an interesting case for several important reasons. First, it is truly a supranational case. Its contents straddle the international boundaries of two partner states of the East African community, Tanzania and Kenya. Second, it's the first case at the ESCJ involving protection of the environment. Question: does the EAC Treaty, which regulates interregional trade, commerce, and so on, encompass environmental issues as well? Put another way, does EACJ have environmental jurisdiction? Answer: yes, the treaty does apply to environmental matters. And yes, the EACJ has such jurisdiction by that case. Third, this was a stellar example of a public interest litigation. Events originating in the territory of Tanzania, litigant was a corporate body incorporated in Kenya, I think it was an NGO or something like that, suing at the headquarters of the supranational court in Arusha. That combination of events makes it a stellar example of public interest litigation. The facts of that case, reduced to their basic minimum, were as follows. The government of Tanzania decided to build a road, in fact, a public highway across the scenic tourism mecca of Serengeti, which straddles the Tanzania-Kenya boundary. Serengeti is world famous for its millions of herds of wild animals, which once every year stage an exodus from Tanzania, cross the international border river to seek green pastures up north in Kenya. The animal exodus is the jewel of tourism the world over. Indeed, Serengeti, for that reason, is a UN-acclaimed UNESCO World Heritage. To build a road right across the Serengeti landscape is to demolish and to destroy the jewel in the crown of world tourism. At the news of this disturbing development, a public-spirited NGO in Kenya sued the Tanzania government in the East African court at Arusha, seeking to stop the madness. One of the many highlights in the case was the question, was an environmental impact study done? That question we before they crossed. Said yes. I think by that time you'll agree that they had lost it. They had totally lost. They had nothing else to argue if you go that way. So we did uphold the protection of the environment and we upheld it, an epic symbol of the iconic tourism shrine. That judgment, to the best of my knowledge, still stands some 6 to 7 years later. The question was put on the program, you lawyers litigating all these things, are you burdening the bench or are you doing something useful for the general public? It's not a simple question. Because someone, public interest means that someone alert and interested can come even without personal benefit, can come and raise the issue so that people can debate it and be a conversation, a judicial conversation about the issue and put matters right. So in a sense, anybody who can bring this up is welcome to do so. You lawyers happen to be a class that is literate in these issues of rights and law and so on. You are enlightened in this general area. My grandma in a small village in Busia, public interest, beyond her own little, those are the rights she thinks she has. But when you go to these environmental and zebra crossings in Serengeti and things like that, it becomes esoteric. So to that extent, anybody who's interested in this kind of thing should be welcome to prosecute these cases. And that's how come we have Mavi disease, we have Mutikla in Tanzania. We used to have a Mavi disease of Tanzania used to be Mutikla. A reverend, a pastor. I don't know if he's still alive, probably not. But those kinds of people are they have a value in this area of litigation. On the other hand, if their interest is intellectual, jurisprudential, it was mentioned by Professor here that maybe they want their profile, they want publicity and things like that. I assure you, the bench is not blind, is not hard of hearing. It will quickly discover any patent or express abuses of the system and of the process. After all, in the definitions of public interest and public welfare, there are all those things about public interest is not a narrow thing of curiosity. It's not just because you are intellectually curious that you come to the court and say, I want a remedy here because the general public has something on this. It's not curiosity. It's not narrow. It has to be something substantive. The victims must be seen, must be obvious. And if you come and you have nothing at all to do with being victimized as such, then we'll put you to the test of what is your interest in this. Okay, the public has an interest. And you? What is yours? We'll look into that. We'll interrogate all that. And the bench, as I say, is not blind. Because after all, what is the bench's role? Substantive justice. To victims, to the interests of the public, yes. But is it just for curiosity's sake, intellectual sake, to put jurisprudence on the books? No, we'll easily go through all of that and say that one is abuse, is not real, is not genuine. In his book, Verdicts on Lawyers, it's a 1976 book, Ralph Nader surmises thus, quote, "The struggle for legal supremacy in a society lies in the tension between raw power and just law. In our legal system, the periodic beacons of justice's triumph have served to mask the frequent exclusion of the many by the few who block ready access to the law. There is a long obstacle course to be run in order to attain justice." Now, Rev. Nader is a man, a finite activist who spent his public life fighting the fights of the general public in America. Such is the essence of the public interest litigation. Such are the critical elements, the basic sentiments the bench holds dear in their heart when adjudicating public interest litigation. I want to end there, but I don't know, do we have 5 minutes? Because this is a training. It's one thing to hear from me and ask questions, but I thought it's also important that I give you some practical tasks. If it had been possible, we would have divided ourselves in 2 and 2 and 3 and answered certain issues here. We have 5 minutes. Yeah. Excellent. Let us divide ourselves. If you 3 make a team, and you 3 make another team, and these 3 or 4 also make a team, let's consider litigating these issues here. Number 1, I've heard that the airport at Entebbe has been sold to the Chinese. If so, there must be a public interest here somewhere. The general public must be interested in this kind of thing because of the values